best advice for a white belt is take a recipe maybe that hasn't been done, because like the minute I'm in line with what everybody else is doing, I'm wrong.
I'm going to throw you in a single leg and you're going to fight having a single leg.
Make them feel like they are succeeding, and also like walk out of there not feeling like I failed them that day, which is something that keeps me up at night sometimes. Like you want to be a coach and you suck as a person, you're always talking smack, like everybody hates you, like you're always hurting people, like you're never going to coach, at least not in my gym.
In front of class, you're like, this is how we're going to do an arm bar, and then everyone's like, he didn't even do an arm bar. That was an omoplata. Like, what are you talking about? Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like... Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Elvis Type Podcast, or the Virtuous Coach, wherever you're listening.
Yeah, wherever you're coming out from, you know what I mean?
Brother, it's been like 3.5 years.
Is that the last time we podcasted?
Yeah, I think you were like episode 3 of the podcast.
Dude, I'm like an OG on your podcast.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
A lot has changed since then. So
I gotta say, can I say something before we get started too? I gotta say, like, I'm super proud of you. Like, I remember when you started this thing, like at the time, like I was really into podcasting. I was like, my podcast was growing like crazy.
It was.
I was just kind of in like this season of life where like I wanted to push super hard on like online stuff. And when you were starting yours, like I always admired like how much effort you put into the show. So you guys listening to the show, like we were just talking about it last night after we got done training, like how much time and effort you put into this podcast. And as an outside person sitting on the outside, and I wanted to save this for the show today, as an outside person sitting, you know, like seeing this from afar, it's been really cool to like watch not only your growth as a person and as a father and as a husband, all those types of things, but also as like seeing you step into this, like, especially now the podcast is all yours, just to see your growth inside of that. And your knowledge is like incredible. Probably like is like, you know, 10 times more than I know about podcasting stuff now. It's incredible to watch. And like, it's been really cool to see you grow this thing, man. So I even appreciate being back on the show again. I know I was an OG and it was probably cool to have me back on there back then, but now I'm just a guy running the business. So yeah, like I said, man, very cool, very proud of you. It's been cool to watch.
No, I appreciate that, man. And you definitely, cause you had started podcasting before I did, and you know the Virtuous, or what was it back in the day?
It was the Create Yourself podcast.
Yeah, the Create Yourself podcast. You know, you were doing twice a week, and I remember you were like, I'm putting out 2 episodes a week, and I was like, bro, I'm doing once every 2 weeks at that time, and I was like, I applaud you for the effort that you were putting in, and it inspired me to keep going. And then now the podcast is at the point, like after John left, it's at the point now where I feel like it's so much bigger than me. You know what I mean? So it's like there's so many people that listen to it and look for value from the guest I bring on or what I have to say. And my journey alone is kind of hard to stop now. It's like so much more than just me chit-chatting with my friend. I mean, it's still pretty much the same thing, but now I have a little bit more of a following, so it's
harder to turn that thing off.
It's harder to turn the thing off. And one of my goals this year was to try to be like crowdfunded as much as possible through my audience, and not to take on sponsorships, just simply because like when it comes to like sponsors and people putting money towards me to promote something, then there's the obligation of I have to do it. And then it gets it's hard because it's like I don't really have anything to say this week, but I need to find something because I have financial obligations to put an episode out this week. So it's been a journey, but it's crazy to think it's coming up on 5 years now.
Yeah, that's cool. It's like literally like as my show was growing, I just got to a point where I was like, I literally can't. I don't have the time. I like, and I probably you're much more, I feel like, efficient with the way that you do things with like your video and stuff like that. I never really adopted that. I've always kind of just been the guy that's like, I'm gonna force it forward basically. And I think that hurt me in the long run to where like even now just getting one episode out a week is very, very challenging. But I do enjoy a podcast. So it's like, and I got this cool podcast recording stuff that I can't just like not use, but so like I said, I love watching what you're doing with it, man.
I appreciate
it actually remotivated, after a conversation we had, it remotivated me to launch mine again and to at the bare minimum get one episode out a week. I used to like record them on my phones and get them out really fast and spend hours, and that time just isn't there anymore. But yeah, man, very cool, dude. It's been cool to watch it.
I appreciate that. And today what I want to talk about is kind of like we just mentioned, like the evolution of the podcast. Well, let's talk about like the evolution of your coaching, my coaching, just coaching in general. Yeah. Because, I started coaching, when did I move here? 2014. So probably 2015 is when I started coaching on the CrossFit side and like weightlifting and whatnot. And to me, coaching is like, it's 100% a skill. right? And to anyone, there's a lot of people that listen to the show that are blue belts and whatnot. And once you get to blue belt, you can become a coach.
Mm-hmm.
You can start teaching jujitsu, at least the bare minimum fundamentals
Sure.
and whatnot. Like I got to do the fundamentals for a little bit before I had to switch my schedule, and seeing just like how much I've changed from being a CrossFit coach and that short stint as a jiu-jitsu coach is like very intriguing to me to see just my evolution, and then watching you obviously over the years, how big you've built this as a business and everything like that. And we can get into that too. And just how you've like grown as a coach is like really inspiring also, because obviously you're like one of my mentors, like
Appreciate
one of my
that.
best friends and whatnot. And I look up to you quite a bit. So I just wanted to like hear how things have changed. And also, you've been going through a lot with like the ecological dynamics, like Henner Gracie, like you're just trying to go back and forth and just find your voice.
Yeah.
So let's start off like when you first started coaching, you started coaching CrossFit or MMA. Like, what was it like? Who were you emulating? Who did you draw inspiration from in order to hopefully have someone learn from what you were saying?
Mm-hmm. I think when I initially started coaching, I wanted to do something different from things that I had always. It's just like now with like some of the leadership stuff that I'm really diving into. It's like I wanted to be a coach that I never had. So I think initially there was. It was like I had like an ongoing identity crisis for the first few years, because there was nobody at the time in the CrossFit space that I had come in contact with that like, because even from the very beginning, I knew CrossFit was like my thing. It was the thing that I loved the most. But at the same time, I felt like just being a CrossFit coach, like it's just what I do. I just teach that methodology. I don't go any deeper than that. Like I don't get into any of the mindset stuff or any of the behind closed door stuff. Like I don't get into any of that. Like I've always like struggled with leaving that alone, because like real change didn't come until like I did dive into some of that stuff with people. So I think for me, like it was this ongoing identity crisis for the first few years, because I was trying to find my voice, find the way that I want to do things. And it took me a good period of time to really understand like who I was. Like, am I the technique guy? Like, am I the programming guy? Am I the deep rooted mindset guy? And I think for me, like I've really landed on like as of late, like I want to be the experience guy, because I've kind of come to this place where it's like, it doesn't matter. There's that saying of like, people don't care how much you know, they just want to know that you care. And I forget who originally said that, but I always kind of go back to that. It's like, at the end of the day, I want to give them as much as I possibly can, not bore them, but it has to be an experience that they keep coming back to. And I think early on, I was kind of doing that without doing it on purpose. And now I very much so am very purposeful in my approach to making sure that this is an enjoyable experience. I tell my coaches over there, like, dude, this needs to be a show. Yeah. This is a freaking concert, dude. Like, they're coming in here, they're looking to
best hour of their day, bro.
For sure. But more than that, like best hour of their week. Like I want them to think every time they come in here, like, man, that was incredible. Like what a great time. And I think about it in jiu-jitsu now is like, I have, and this is just me being very transparent with your audience and with you. Like I have a daily imposter syndrome with jiu-jitsu, because there are people in our gym right now that I would argue are probably more knowledgeable than me. So there's always this thing of like, man, am I saying something wrong? Is there something technically that I'm off with here? But at the end of the day, like if I just can kind of revert back to like, I studied, I'm prepared, I have dived as deep as I possibly could into this thing. I'm not putting it together when I get here. And I'm trying to make sure that everybody here gets better at jiu-jitsu today. If I can just kind of revert back to that and remember that, like, sure, if I forget a grip position or to turn my hips a certain way, like I came from a lens of I was as prepared as I possibly could and I gave my absolute best on the floor that day, then it doesn't matter if somebody in the room is critiquing how I'm showing something, because like I'm not coming from the intention of like this unprepared, like not caring person. I'm coming through this lens of like, I want this to be the best freaking class that I can give this person in this 60-minute time block. And if I fall short, I know that I've given it my all. And I know for a fact, based off of all the other coaches, probably people you've been around in the past, like that is more than what a lot of people, at least in the grappling industry, can say.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to talk about too, because I definitely have noticed, like when Sean's, for people at home that don't know, Sean, our instructor, he has wrestling season. He takes a complete step away. I feel like it happens. There's been so many times that out inadvertently and advertently, I guess you could say, that this has happened. But I did notice, like once Sean came and he took his first like step away for wrestling season, bro. You were like, to be honest, I was like, Cody has no voice right now. He is like struggling to find out how the hell to do this. And it like last night's class, I was thinking on my way home, I was like, that was a good class. Like that was solid. You know what I mean? Like there was no point to where I felt like you're like second guessing yourself. Even when you caught on to something, like I even asked a question, you're like, that's a good point. Like
I think I had to do it again to see what I did, right?
Yeah, and I think that just comes with experience, because I know when I first started coaching the fundamentals, I was like, bro, like Keegan will show up, Jack will show up, and I'm like these guys are crushing me.
They know stuff.
Yeah. And I would like to think like just because of like jiu-jitsu is pretty much my life outside of my family and work because of the podcast and jiu-jitsu and making content, that I still like to know that I know a good amount of stuff. But then there's obviously levels to everything.
Yeah.
So when it came to coaching the fundamentals, I was like, I have to be 100% ready to your point, to the best of my ability, bro. Right? Because failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Right? So I was like, not knowing something doesn't make me scared, right? It's okay to not know something. Like I tell my kids all the time, like, you don't know what you don't know. It's okay. And if someone says like, hey, it's supposed to be this way, you have to be humble enough to accept that and be like, okay, thank you for that, but not being prepared scares me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like stepping on the mat and be like, what the hell am I supposed to teach today?
You know what I think is like really set up a lot of like, and I can only speak from what I've experienced in like the arena of jiu-jitsu, is like, I think there's always kind of been this thing to where like jiu-jitsu instructors act as if like there is a singular way of doing something, or like, that's wrong. And I'm like, well, I've done it this way hundreds of times to people. So is it wrong, or is it just different? So like I've always, and now like even when I'm explaining stuff to people, I say, guys, I really struggle with saying like, this is the way to do something. It kind of goes back to like when you're doing content, like you never want to tell people what they should do. You want to tell people what you've done. Right. So I really go through the lens of, now I say things like, this is how I would typically approach XYZ situation. But, with you being shorter, with you being taller, like these sort of things can be, which is like why ecological dynamic stuff was like, or the ecological approach or the restrained sled approach, like that was so like attractive to me. It was just because like, man, like they're speaking to my mind that I've always, because even sometimes if I've seen techniques, I've gone to seminars. I went to a Ribeiro Brothers seminar one time, and like they showed some stuff and like everybody's soaking it up, and like none of it worked for me. And like somebody listening to this, well, you probably weren't doing something wrong. And I'll tell you what, like I've always been pretty detail oriented down to as much as I can possibly like absorb. And maybe I'm 6'5", and the way that they place their hips and their feet just ain't going to work for me. So, so now when I really explain that is like the struggle of for years and years black belts, all the way from like Brazilian black belts, even some now, maybe some you've interviewed who think that like there's a certain way to do things. I know in fitness, which I've coached in for 10 years, and now I've coached jiu-jitsu consistently for about 6 years, like there tends to never be a singular, there is a more right than wrong way, which in my coaching, my instructing, I try to be more right than wrong. But like there's never just a single way though.
Yeah.
And I think like we were maybe, initially for me, it was like when Sean came, he was so good. He was better than any instructor I'd ever seen, any instructor I'd ever spoken with or like interacted with. And like, I felt so fortunate to be able to learn from him and to be able to absorb things from him. And it identified this large gap in my instructing, in the way that I would deliver a session. And at that time, initially, like I was like, dude, I got to level up or I'm gonna lose my people, because he cast this shadow that was so wide and so broad that it was like, if I don't level up, because truly in the past, like I would just kind of go off of things that I would see or things that I would remember. And like, I would basically do technique of the day in class and didn't really think too much about like, well, so now like when I view growth in jiu-jitsu, I think there's self-study, there's exploration, and then there's technique of the day from the gym, right? I think there's like this triad of how you grow. Well, like I was only doing technique of the day. So when I came in and I needed to start coaching, I was like, oh my gosh, like I got to like know a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So I kind of went back to like, well, I just going to be a chapter ahead of everybody.
Yeah.
Right. And then a lot of instructors will poo-poo on instructionals and things that like BJJ Fanatics has, some of your guys like, Pressinger and some of his like membership stuff. And I'm like, man, like that's like sitting in at a seminar anytime you want to.
Yeah.
So I'm going to really dive into literally content. Like we're going through arm bars right now. Like I was studying that for like the last 6 weeks. And like, then I'm going to be going in X guard. Like I'm already starting to study that, even though I'm showing. So it's like, I'm already making sure that I am prepared and I've got as much of the variances of these things understood so that I can field a question, or maybe I need to feel out and just see what happens. But it's always going to revert back to like, there's not one way to do anything. There's multiple ways to do anything. Here's how I believe is an effective way of doing XYZ technique, move, whatever.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up something. That's why I brought this book, is because it leads into, I'm reading Show Your Work, if you guys haven't read
Great
this at
book.
home,
Great
by
book.
Austin Kleon. And one thing he talks about is, and you just alluded to it right there, is everyone's an amateur. Even professionals are somewhat amateurs, right? Just because you get paid to do something doesn't mean like you're professional. And amateurs are open-minded, right? And something that they said is amateurs might lack formal training, but they are all lifelong learners, and they make a point to learn in the open so that others can learn from the failures and successes. If that's not jiu-jitsu,
That's it.
That's it.
What is jiu-jitsu?
Right. That is page 16 of Show Your Work. And when I read that, I was like, bro, it's so true, because I'm even open with my successes and failures. Like this, like I told you last night on my last episode for 2023, I even opened up about my financial gains within the podcast. And I think transparency is great, and letting people know, like, hey, these are where you can do good, and this is where I've done bad. Because to your point also, jiu-jitsu techniques, like, it's no one size fits all. Like, you have to try, you have to fail, you have to figure out what works for you. And that's one thing that, like ecological dynamics, Keegan and Jack don't like it. And I'm not 100% sold on it either, but I do find, as someone that only gets to train a very limited time, and I can't dedicate a whole lot of time to instructionals or anything like that, because I got kids running around, or, I can't sit there and like focus completely. I find that, doing an hour of jiu-jitsu from start to finish is very beneficial for someone that has very limited time. You know what I mean? And that was something that we've been talking about quite a bit. And, I listened to, Rob Gray, his podcast. I've read both his books or listened to both his books.
Yeah.
And that's been very interesting to me. And I can see why, some people are for and against it, because, it's like CrossFit. When CrossFit first came out on the scene, everyone was like, that's stupid. Why would you do that? Why would you throw heavy barbell movements into a high intensity workout? And it's like, well, this is why.
But then it swung one way, right? So here's my problem with ecological dynamics, and with even that, like, so to the CrossFit comment, when CrossFit came into the industry, everybody said that's stupid. It's not going to work. Well, it totally works. But then it kind of went the other way to where, like, well, CrossFit's all you should be doing. I'm like, well, no, I don't know that should be true either. So that's my struggle with like ecological stuff, is just and I'll kind of tell your listeners like what we've been doing for our curriculum for any instructors that are kind of watching this. But the struggle with like full on ecological is like, because if I think of like, for me, well, I've got a little bit more time to train. I get a lot from like a technique, but it can't be too much. Like, you can't show me 5 techniques in a thing. As almost a black belt, like we'll see.
So crazy to hear.
Which is nuts. Sean told me, whisper in my ear, a little sweet nothings about when it's coming. I was like, I don't want it, bro. Hold on to it. I'm good. We're good.
That means I have to coach more.
Yeah, bro. But to that point is like the ecological guys are saying that's the only way you should do it. And then the technique drill. So then the technique guys are like, all you need is really good technique. And then you got your drilling crowd where like, just do things hundreds of thousands of times. And I'm like, well, I don't know that from being in the coaching industry for this long, I don't know that any of those are the right way.
Right.
What if like, and then somebody would argue, well, is there a right way per person? Fitness is completely individual. Is jiu-jitsu learning completely individual?
Absolutely.
Probably,
I
right?
think so.
So it's like, okay, with all of these different realms, like even to my class last night, right? Like there was live at the end, kind of ecological, maybe a little loose on some of my restraints in the positional sparring time of the day, but like, we did some technique in the beginning. It was a lot of moving, it was a lot of doing, less instruction. Then I got into some instruction, and then I did some positional, like ecologically minded thought or minded drills at the very end. So it was like, okay, I'm trying to give the whole spectrum in all of my things now. I'm doing it in fundamentals too. So it's like, I'm not completely sold on one thing in fitness. Like, you want to hear my inappropriate analogy for how I explain fitness?
By all means.
Okay, so I literally tell this to new clients. It's super funny because it makes them laugh, and then they're like, oh man, this dude's kind of funny. So I say, if a bodybuilder, a CrossFitter, an Olympic lifter, a power lifter, an endurance athlete, a gymnast, a bodyweight specialist, like all the things in the world got together, and there was this wild party, and they were drinking way too much beer, and they had a baby. That's what my gym is. And they laugh, but I'm like, but they get it. They're like, well, wow, he's saying that they do everything. They're a hybrid of all these things. And I think for jiu-jitsu, that's where I'm driving us right now. in the past, you asked me earlier, like where would I get inspirations from? The cook versus chef analogy. I was very much like a cook. I would look around and just kind of see what everybody was doing, and I would like essentially copy their recipe. Whereas now, I still look around, I still shop, I'm still looking for inspiration, but it's because I'm trying to make my own recipe. I'm like, well, let me take a little bit of this, a little bit of garlic and a little bit of onion powder and some paprika, and let's put all this stuff together and let's make a new recipe maybe that hasn't been done, because like the minute I'm in line with what everybody else is doing, like I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be like everybody else. So you ask me like if I'm looking around at what other people are doing, yeah, to a point. But I was trying to find my own identity in that. And truly, when I stopped my podcast, one of the reasons is because I'm like everybody else.
Yeah.
I'm just doing interviews. I'm asking the same questions everybody else has. Like it didn't feel like unique. And I think to give you some more props again, like I've drawn inspiration in how you like I go and I listen to your podcast, and like lately I feel like you've been sharing a lot of like just your documenting. And Gary Vee always says like don't create, document, right?
Yeah.
Or don't. I think that's what he said.
Yeah.
Something to the tune of like, just show what you're doing. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I totally got into like everything had to be like put up and propped up as this. It was this thing versus like just sharing what you do.
Yeah.
Right. So like I think that's the chefing and podcasting, the same way that mixing things together in jiu-jitsu would be the same thing. It's like I'm just mixing it, trying to make my own recipe, and I want to do something different. I don't want to live like everybody else. I want you to come here and be like, you guys charge how much? Well, this much. Well, like, why do you charge more than everybody else? Because I'm better than everybody else.
Boom. Gotcha.
I try harder than everybody else, right? Like, we are more prepared than everybody else. You're never going to get an instructor who just walks in here that, like, thought about what he was going to do 2 minutes before. It's like, no, dude, I'm thinking about what we're doing 4 weeks from now.
Yeah.
Keegan's already trying what he's going to be showing 2 weeks from now. Like, we're working, we're mapping, and we've got this hive mind thing going right now to where it's like, well, 4, 5 jiu-jitsu instructors coming together on one curriculum is better than one doing it by himself. So that's kind of where I'm at to answer that, to kind of go into that a little bit.
No, and looking back, when you started talking about the Henner Gracie and how they run their academies and whatnot, and at first I was like, I don't know, man, because I don't feel like it was hard. It was hard for me to get behind it at first, because I was like, I don't know, man. I just feel like, there's like this stigma that comes with like Gracie Jiu-Jitsu nowadays, because they're, very traditional in the way that they are.
With their 600 students and very successful.
I was about to say, right. And I was about to say, it's like the same thing with Gracie Baja. I interviewed Mike Bates over in the UK, who rode across the Atlantic Ocean by himself, right? And he's a Gracie Baja affiliate. And he's like, I love Gracie Baja. He's like, I have 350 students. He's like, there was no way I was going to get this done by myself. He's like, they have the tools and the system put in place to where anyone can be successful underneath them. And so as a business owner, I can completely see why, going 100% eco might not be beneficial. And if you guys want to disagree with us, by all means, let us know down in the comments below. But how it might not be beneficial to your academy, right? Because, granted, once again, eco's still relatively new, and this is me not bashing on them, but it's hard to find a super popular, hundreds. And if there is out there, let us know too.
Well, success leaves clues.
Yeah.
Right? Like how many, like most of the biggest gyms in the world have like a soft landing for new faces.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and if we're going to be, like, I'm a big faith guy, right? Like, know this about me now for the past few years, but like, as a Christian man, like I'm an ambassador for Jesus, right? Like if you look at me and I'm this cowardly, weak, feminine man, and I'm telling you how like about the gospel that is, Christ, and you're looking at me like I want nothing of what you got, right? Like am I being the proper ambassador for that? The same way with jiu-jitsu is like, what's the goal of jiu-jitsu? A lot like Christianity. We want to spread it. We want to get more people involved. We want to make it more accessible to people. But here we are, and I group myself into this because I was that too. Like here we are a few years ago, like getting almost elitist.
Yeah.
To where it's like
CrossFit was the same way.
Totally, which is why I changed. Which is why I changed, right? So
and I think why a lot of people have changed from the
for sure.
Because I think CrossFit
is behind that right now. Like they're like, well, it's totally elitist.
Yeah. And because I think CrossFit, people would see the name CrossFit and they would get intimidated by it because of all the videos on social media, the CrossFit games. Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I think it's better than it was.
My name doesn't even say jiu-jitsu anymore.
Right. And we'll get to that too.
Yeah.
And I think it's because the same thing why it's Virtuous Fitness now, right? It's because it's more of a welcoming thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Same with like, instead of saying virtuous BJJ, it's kind of grouping you into
Mm-hmm.
something that, good or bad, you're tied to it.
Yeah.
Kind of like CrossFit when Greg had all that drama. People were
Sure.
like, dropping the CrossFit, don't want to be associated with
Mm-hmm.
this. You know what I mean? And so that was interesting too. But it's I don't know. It's cool to see how much has changed in such a short time uh, that we've been over here, right? Because when we first started, it was Gracie Online. We'd have it up on the TV that was
Yeah.
over there, the little mat,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd like, okay, what are we doing today?
Yeah.
And then you'd come in and we teach it, and I thought that was great
Yeah.
still because I mean everyone was starting off brand new, so learning the
It's like it was
fundamentals.
what we needed at that time.
Oh, 100%, right? But, and like you mentioned earlier, I don't think there is a one size fit all, one technique to coaching everything. And I may come off like I'm 100%, I want to do 100% ecological. No, I just want to implement it more because I just see so much value in it from my point of view.
Sure.
But I think as long as we are doing jujitsu, like that's good.
Yeah.
Like as long as to me, what does everyone say you learn the most is sparring, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the live action of jujitsu with real resistance. I think that's like for advanced. I don't know necessarily for fundamentals if that's great. I think it has to be eased into it, maybe short rounds or
I can see like certain times where like the eco sparring stuff matters.
yeah,
I mean, to use our gym as an example, like when we did eco, our fundamentals program fell apart,
yeah,
right? And it wasn't something you did. It wasn't something that anybody else who coached here did. It was like kind of me as the leadership. Like I set us up there. Like, hey, this is what I want to do, and it's like then that program kind of died, and now since we've kind of revamped the fundamentals, a little bit of a softer landing, people are like coming in here not getting scared off day one. Like people are sticking a little bit. So it's like it was kind of this cool change, which came from listening to that Henner podcast. And to your point about like how we've always kind of changed and evolved over the years, like if there's anything you can trust about me, and I'm sure you've known me for quite some time now, like you've probably seen, is like I am always going to be open to change. I am always going to move forward in a growth-minded direction in some way, shape, or form. I may not make the best decisions all the time, but I'm not scared of making a decision, and you will always see growth inside of something that I'm going to be attached to. So that's something that I've looked at with grappling and stuff like that. I was like, hey man, we're going to fail forward, and when we find our rhythm, just like when I found my rhythm in the gym, this will be the same way. And then I'm not going to be because I used to be the little fitness gym that everybody would be like, oh yeah, that's that little gym that's in that racquetball court. Now it's like, dude, you see what Cody's doing now? Like,
and then there was even
different.
the point where we were like super competitive. The whole school or the whole
We were the meathead gym.
Yeah, we were like we'd go to local competitions or even local PNW competitions, and we'd like pretty much win or dominate or get in the top 3, and
Sure.
and then there was like that whole like, okay, now we have a competition class. Now I felt like there was like a little bit of like segregation
Totally.
between members of like, oh, these are people on this side of the gym are the ones that are RXing.
That's the
doing,
scary. That's the scary side.
yeah. And as a coach, I would hear people be like, I don't want to go over there. That's where all the badasses are. And like, no, they're just people that want to go harder. But there was the whole perceived like elitism. I can't say it. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
And I think that can happen in jiu-jitsu too.
Sure.
I definitely think if someone were to come into an advanced class and the coach is very militant, like yelling at people, driving us into the dirt, I think that can cause anyone that's not a meathead to be like, this might not be for me, man.
It scares them off, right?
Yeah.
And it's like if we're gonna, again, back to the ambassador thing. If we're gonna be ambassadors of jiu-jitsu, like it's got to be something that people are gonna want to do and that people are gonna actually do. And I understand, like, there's probably guys that listen to your show that either go to a gym that is maybe more competition minded or maybe a little bit more of like an abrasive environment, and it could be successful. But I guarantee that same gym likely has been about that same size for a period of time. I guarantee that like the culture there isn't nearly as connected, which are the things that matter to me. Like if I've got a bunch of people competing, but they're like, people come here sometimes that are competition minded and they kind of spin out and they end up not staying here. And I view that as like, well, my culture doesn't fit them, and that's great. But it's because like I want this to be a an environment that is welcoming to people so that I can actually have the opportunity to reach people and to show them jiu-jitsu. And I don't get that opportunity if I kind of turn into the elitist, like more abrasive environment. And that's just my opinion. That's not right. Again, the same way there's no one way to do jiu-jitsu, I'm assuming there's probably no one way to do business. But what I have seen thus far in my ownership of, 2 businesses and then coaching other people who have businesses, that tends to be more right than it is wrong, if that makes sense.
So how do you, as a coach, business owner, how do you know if it's time to switch something because it's not working, or that you're not giving it enough time to work itself out?
Good question. I don't know if there's a right answer there. I think generally a few months for most things will show you its true colors, right? Or at least give you, so I track data like crazy. Like I keep data on people that come in the door versus people that stay, people that set appointments versus people that actually show up to those appointments, average time a person spends with us, average attendance. Like I track all of these things. So when we insert a change into something, I start watching my numbers a ton. I do it with fitness, right? So when I start to see a downward trend, not just a good month, a bad month, but when I see a downward trend across like so to answer your question, I don't know that there's one way, but I watch trends in my data and I just kind of see what's going on with that data. And generally that helps me, rather than making an emotional decision about like a change in our curriculum or a change in our offering, whatever it may be. I rely more on like, what are the numbers saying? Because like that tends to be more wrong than right. So, or more right than wrong. So to answer that question, I think there's probably no like specific time, but I operate in a data and feel based environment to give the best grasp on things that I can.
How do you develop that field? Because it's not like it's going to happen. You open the doors.
Experience.
And you know what I mean?
Experience, right? I mean, I would say back when the gym was ran by other people, I didn't have that feel. Now I feel like I have a really good finger on the pulse of both sides of my business, right? And now it's almost like you can, sometimes when you're in an environment and you can feel like energy shift across days and weeks and stuff like that. Like I can feel that energy shift, and it's kind of like, it's hard to explain like what it looks like. And again, I can see it in numbers, but like the feel it's just something it's just this gut feeling that you get. And I've always really tried to live on that gut, like that when I get a gut feeling, making a decision off of that rather than like being an emotionally charged to do something. The data has been something the past few years that I've kind of leaned on to help me navigate that gut feeling. So I don't know if that's like the exact answer, just because I don't want to sit here and lie and be like, oh, I 2 weeks. I don't know. I don't know. I'll go off the field, I'll look at my numbers, and then I decide based off of that. But when I see a downward trend for the period of a few months, and it's not just like I had a bad month, it's like consistently down or consistently up, then I'll make a change based off of that.
When did you start embracing like the humility of knowing that you, as a coach and as a business owner, you don't know everything? Because I know when you first start, that could be a very hard. Totally. You could be super egotistical, like this is my business. No one's going to tell me how to run it. No one's going to tell me how to coach. Like when did you start like, shit, man, maybe I should start listening to other people?
I've had a healthy fear of failure. As in, like, I actually heard Kevin Hart talk about this recently on the Joe Rogan podcast. He said he wakes up every day feeling like the life that he lives is like he's going to be found out and it's going to be taken from him. I've always kind of operated there. Maybe I'd say about 2 years in, I started to feel like I could lose it all, because then I started to have something that was worth losing.
For the CrossFit side, when you first started 7 Cities?
Yeah. Jiu-Jitsu, I instantly knew when the Jiu-Jitsu gym opened that I didn't know enough, and it was just like one big experiment. For me, in my setup, I was fortunate enough to where fitness made enough financially for me to make the big mistakes over here. But yeah, I'd say very early on, like a year or two in, I was like, man, I don't know anything. Like
I think the big thing too with like, and we've seen it through fake coaches and whatnot. I think jiu-jitsu has the ability to show you right away. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to fake it when it comes to coaching jiu-jitsu. Totally. As to where on the fitness side, you can use big words and like kind of read an Instagram story real quick and then come in and talk about something. And it's a lot easier to make it seem like you know more than you do.
So you got to practice the thing. You got to look like you've actually done the technique before.
Right, because if you get in front of class and you're like, this is how we're going to do an arm bar, and then everyone's like, he didn't even do an arm bar. That was an omoplata. Like, what are you talking about? Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's much easier to get found out, you know? And that's one thing that I worry about, too, with the podcast is I'm like, oh, my God, when is there going to be the day where someone like they're like I found something on Travis, is like this isn't he's not real, but I mean
His deep Reddit thread.
yeah, I was like, but I try to be as real as
Totally.
possible. You know what I mean? And I think people gravitate towards that, even as a coach. If you are a coach that puts yourself above everyone else, and like you don't have that, you know, that attitude of like people can approach you, or you know, like back in the day in jiu-jitsu, you can't ask a black belt to roll like they're on a pedestal. I just don't see how that is even possible nowadays.
It's got to be a miserable existence because you always feel like you have to be on.
Yeah.
And I think like, so two things that come to mind when you said that. Number one, I actually teach my sons this. It's something I've spoken with my oldest boy a lot about. Is the first thing is that the person that tells the truth. I usually say the man that tells the truth is the man in the room that is the most truthful is always going to be the most powerful. That's the first thing. Second thing is that when you always tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything. So it's like when I try to be like just authentic as I possibly can with people, and I'm imperfect. There are times where I say something, I'm like, man, that wasn't right. Like, why'd you say that? And I analyze that and I try to be better next time I'm in that situation. But with jiu-jitsu, I try to be very like transparent with like, I don't know the answer to that. Or lately, I won't even try to show a thing that I have not practiced or done myself because I just feel like it's like, I didn't just, I'd never want to look like, which is what I used to look like in the past. I would watch a video and I'd come show it that day. Now it's like, no, dude, I'm watching videos. I'm trying that crap before I come in. Like I've learned a couple different ways. I got drop backs to things that I can't, like I had 5 different ways I could have went yesterday with class because it was just like, well, if this goes poorly, like I worried about that, that roll through that we did for the armbar. I worried that people weren't going to be able to get it, and everybody started to get it. And I was like, good, because if not, I was going to work on like, well, hopping to an S mount pressure, and then if a person push over, what can you do? You can armbar them from top. So like, I already kind of had like which directions I would go based off what they gave me. But yeah, so like just being as truthful as you can all the time is a much safer place to be, especially with the podcast, because you're out in the ether. People are
this is going to be here forever.
Yeah.
Even if I delete it, someone's got it.
Somebody pirated that stuff for sure. Yeah, dude, for sure.
So as you're coaching in jiu-jitsu, and I know as a coach in CrossFit, right? So we would see triage, right? Always work on the person that you see has the biggest issues and kind of touch the people that are more experienced just so they feel like they're noticed, right? In jiu-jitsu, there could be times when the whole class needs to be triaged. You know what I mean? How do you approach that?
Good question. So I think I actually try to, lately, in the past, I would just try to address it. All right, guys, seems like everybody's messing up here, and I bring us back in and kind of do the thing. Now, I try to, and it's interesting when I make curriculum now, like for my day or I make my plan, I come at it through the ecological lens. Of like, if I had to make this into game base, what would it look like? So, even yesterday, like I don't think I got to where I showed an entry, did I? Into S mount?
No,
I didn't show an entry, right?
Yeah.
Which is where the progression is going, right? So, I kind of begin with the end in mind, and then I back out of that. So it's just like when we teach to clean, what do we teach first? The thing that people are going to mess up the most, which is the jump and catch. So we go there first, and we go through each position. Now I do that in jiu-jitsu to where I think like, we're going through armbar. I don't think we finished one armbar yesterday.
Yeah.
I just kind of set you guys in the position right before the finish, and then we worked on like control with the legs, control with the arms, different body movements based off of responses. Like that's kind of the lens that I went through. So in the past, I would do just kind of like a bulk triage of like what was the most gross fault inside of everybody making the mistake. Now, I just simply try to make my curriculum in a way to where when I come to the session that day, I'm set up in a way to maybe negate some of those major faults happening already versus like, okay, guys, we're like yesterday. So yesterday when I taught class, we went through arm bars essentially from the top position, right? We started in a seated position, perpendicular to our partner, arm between our legs. We worked on good connection through our legs. And then we worked on different reactions based off of what your opponent did against you, right? So that is a different lens versus like, okay, guys, today we're starting in mount. We're going to move to S mount into the arm bar. We've done 8 steps now, and we're finishing the arm bar. Now everybody screws everything up.
Yeah.
So it's just I've kind of negated all of that in my preparation, but that's due to looking at it through the lens of like, well, if I was going to teach this ecological, what would I do? I'd start him in the arm bar and kind of back out of that, right? So that's kind of the approach that I've taken recently, and I've actually found with that, because I've been doing that a lot, I'd say the past 3-4 months of me coaching, because prior to that, Sean was doing it. I found that that's actually eliminated a lot of the correction that has to happen, because I didn't have to go through 20 steps to get to the, the major faults. It's like I just started with the most simple 3 step, or the most difficult 3 steps in the entire sequence, and I'm going to back out of that. But so the last day of this whole sequence, or this whole like cycle, we're going to have a sequence all the way to all of our finishes. But how many times did you practice that armbar position yesterday? How many times did you practice the S mount switch? How many times did you practice the stacking position? Like, it was just, we're getting those reps in, and now when I get to the entry, it's like, oh dude, I know how to finish. I've done this for 2 days already. Instead of doing again, mount, transmission, S mount, here's one armbar. Mount, transition to S, you know what I mean? Like, by the time like you get there, like there's just so many things that can go wrong. Again, it'd be equivalent to teaching the clean right from the shin, right off the jump, versus starting from top down.
Yeah, and I forgot who said it, but it was a ecological guy. Maybe it was Kit Dale, or someone else. I don't remember who it was, but they were talking about how they teach single legs, how they teach takedowns. They're like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw you in a single leg, and you're going to fight having a single leg. And then I don't need to worry about you getting into an entry, because you're going to be so confident that you can finish the single leg that you're going to, once you get there, you're good. Yeah. You're like, you don't, because I feel like, to your point, I think it's great to do the submission as many times as possible without finishing it, right? Because that's going to cause a lot of wear and tear on people. But I think it builds the confidence that when people get there, they're not like, oh my God, I got an armbar. I need to grip and rip as fast as possible and finish it. Like, it just makes a safer environment, because we have the repetitions, we have the reps there. Like, we're like, okay, I have an armbar. I remember now, like, just hold on to it. I'm not worried about not knowing how to finish it, because I've done 2 weeks of finishing an armbar, and then, because I feel like the transition into an armbar is a lot easier to get to than finishing the armbar. You know what I mean? So how do you approach when you see new people and they're struggling with certain aspects of jiu-jitsu in their game, and you're like, okay, how can I make them feel more confident in this, even though they're beginners and the only time you're going to really build confidence is doing it? But how do you kind of like start implementing it to where these people are going the right path, to where they can grow faster, I guess you could say?
I look at number one, like, where do I want to get them to? And then I back out and I say, well, what would be a win for them today? So perfect example is, we have in our fundamental session, we have 2 teenage faces. And they're not, and then I can go into a whole rant with like kids jiu-jitsu and stuff like that too, but they're not what you would say like super athletic, super like, they're not good with like spatial awareness and stuff like that, right? They just don't have that
body awareness.
They don't have that. Yeah, they don't have that command of their body yet, and how they do things versus, maybe some of the adults in the session are different, versus like we have a client who's a little bit older, a little bit shorter, that just kind of struggles with things, right? So I always kind of revert to like, okay, where am I trying to get to today? And again, I would argue this goes with, like, the same way we talk about like games really matter, and the way you do, and whether those games are put together well or not can call for the success in that game or not, or in that environment or not. So curriculum is a big deal in the planning of that too, because you can negate some of this stuff, like I said. But I think I look at like, where am I trying to get in this session today? What is a win for them, right? Like, based off of their current like setup, and I'm triaging, I'm looking at some of the gross faults, like, for the arm bar as an example, like, are they, are they getting to a good finishing position with their knees pinched together and their big toes crossed, and they've got, pressure on the face and on top of the chest? Like, are they there? Do they have the arm held properly? Like, I'll kind of look at those things. And if they're really struggling, then I kind of just need to paint a picture in my head as a coach, to where like, what would make them feel as if they are winning today, and be as close to the picture I'm trying to paint as possible, and then trying to get there. Or there's also this analogy of, we're all, I said this yesterday when we were coaching class for the armbar with the advanced class. I said, if you struggle with the roll through for the armbar, continue to practice the thing before. So I said those things to say, because when I'm coaching people, I imagine as if we're driving on a highway, right? And on that highway, each exit is another progression in the difficulty of things. And maybe I drop them off at this exit and continue with the group to this exit, but I can always circle back around and kind of check in on them. And they're still doing the main path. We're still following it. I'm getting them a win. In my mind, what is a win for them today, and what makes them feel good about what they're doing? And then I continue forward, dropping people off at exits. And I do it in fundamentals. I did it in the advanced class yesterday, which is always encouraging, because I never want to here's a fault of mine. In the past, if I looked around the gym and one person in a group is just completely off, not getting it, I would try to correct it a couple times and then I would just let it go. They're just not going to get it. Now I look at it like, well, hey, what is a win for them in this environment today? And let's work on that instead. If it's something slightly different than everybody else, cool. Like I'm not going to tell certain people with, really short legs to try to get into this perfect triangle position with, oh boy, who's got a freaking 60-foot wide shoulder base, right? Like,
Yeah.
well, so I'm going to give them something a little bit different. Maybe I give them another variation, whatever it may be, but I'm going to give them a win that day, and in my head, they're as close to that picture as I can get them. And then I always just got to remember as I progress them forward, I got to keep putting touches on that photo or on that picture as I continue to go, and just again continuing to get them wins. Because my goal is to keep them coming back and learning jiu-jitsu. And if I make them feel like crap because they're not doing the move that day, they're never going to come back anyways. Maybe they find them. And again, if I go into the self-defense conversation, maybe that person's jiu-jitsu that they would have learned later on could prevent them from being in some sort of altercation, whatever that may be. But I say all those things to say, what is a win for them? How can I get them? I have a picture in my head for that day. How can I get that person as close to that picture as possible and make them feel like they are succeeding, and also like walk out of there not feeling like I failed them that day, which is something that keeps me up at night sometimes.
So when it comes to coaching, or you as a coach, where did you feel that you had gained the most change? Like at what point in your coaching, whether it's jiu-jitsu, CrossFit, business, or whatever, or even coaching coaches, right? Where did you feel was the biggest like aha moment where you're like, shit, I should probably start doing it more this way?
Hopefully this is an unconventional answer, but a few years ago I read this book called Not Principles. Yeah, I think it was Principles. I could be complete. Influence is what it was called. But Robert Cialdini.
Yeah, I got that book now.
Yeah, it's great, right? I mean, it's like
I haven't read it yet.
it's
but
like a honker textbook.
after
right?
this one, I'm going to read
It's
it.
a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot. But like understanding, because it teaches you like how to influence, and like they call them compliance professionals, which is like a marketer basically. But I guess I didn't realize how much in like communication and in coaching and in day-to-day life, how much just understanding like psychology of people really mattered. And it's been very interesting because like ever since I read that book, and then I went into another book called Persuasion, and like how and you see it in the world with like politics and stuff like that, like how people can be so manipulated and can be like talked into a thing. But it's just like when you really understand how people are influenced, and then like their like basic needs, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like when you start to really understand those things, I feel like it helped me with people. It helped me to be a better coach. It really helps me to be a better salesman, right? Because that's an art, that's a skill in itself. But like, I would say when I really embraced like the understanding of like how to influence behavior, that was like the biggest change for me. And again, those books were Influence and Persuasion. They're both by Robert Cialdini. When I read that book, I started to kind of be able to see through things that people would say to me, and I could see through the way that people would act, and I could just see it everywhere. So it was as if I had been like, what is it, red pilled or blue pilled, whatever it may be. I felt like I was red pilled, and I could just like see through things. So that's probably the biggest thing for me coaching wise that like completely changed everything I do. And that was probably like 3 years ago.
What other books would you recommend someone wanting to get better at coaching should read?
I think leadership books in general are always pretty good. Leader Who Had No Title. Leader Without a Title is a really good one. That's Robin Sharma. That's a great book. Trying to think what else. I think it's a book called Legacy. It's essentially a story about, I think it's Legacy, but it's a story about the New Zealand All Blacks, and they talk about like how one of their like slogans in the All Blacks is like no dicks allowed. So basically like it talks
They're
about
all males, though.
yeah,
No.
right. But it just talks about like how they built culture in that
Yeah.
rugby organization, and it goes back to like from the leadership down, how they've created a winning system based off of that. But I think like coaching wise, like you're a leader, right? Like I got patches for our youth kids who helped the Minion session, and it says youth leader on it, because like I believe leaders make other leaders, right? So I want to create other leaders, because I even thought about with our coaches, don't put coach on the back, put leader on the back. Because I think like when it comes to being a great coach, you got to be a great leader. You have to create followable excellence. You have to be a person that does what they say they're going to do when they're going to do it for people. You have to show up consistently for people. And I think that all kind of flows back into like the leadership bucket. So extreme ownership, literally any leadership book out there you can possibly think of is probably a good place to go as a coach, because when you start to understand, like, you're not just a person facilitating a room, that you're actually leading them through an experience, an environment, an art, a fitness regimen, like whatever it is, like you are leading them through this thing. When you really embrace the leadership side of it, I think that can like level up 10x your dang coaching overnight if you read a book.
One thing that I talk about a lot when it comes to coaches, and a lot of times people think high level competitor equals high level coach, and it couldn't be further from the truth. And
Yes.
because I know you've produced regional athletes in CrossFit, and you've competed at a high level in pretty much everything that you do. And I'm sure it's not everyone that you trained under was a world champ. You know what I mean?
Mm-mm.
So what not accolades? What do you look for in a coach to follow them? Because I know you have a lot of coaches in your personal life right now too.
Too
So
many, too much into it. I think sometimes coaches, what qualities that I look for coaching, first and foremost is, I always use the terms like followable excellence. do they do they do they seem worthy of being followed? Is the first thing, right?
are they a
Because
charlatan?
right, are they selling me some snake oil or whatever it may be? Like, I don't want. Um, I have to believe that that person is who they say they are, and they live a life. Because when I hire coaches, they generally have created a level of success that I am searching for in some realm: jiu-jitsu, business, fitness. Um, Recently, like, I've hired like Christian mentors, like, because they have they have reached a level of success inside of a thing. They have achieved a level of excellence that I would like to achieve too. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna get as close to that fire as I can, because I want some of that smoke, right? So it's like, for me, when I'm looking to hire a coach, it's like, does that person have a level that I want? And then I'm going to go get as close to that person as I can, because I want to feed off of their greatness. Not because I'm trying to mooch off of them or I'm trying to be a time vampire. I definitely don't want to be an ask hole to where I ask people for things and don't implement. But I want to get next to a coach that has a level of excellence in a thing that I want, and I'm going to go learn everything that I can from that person. And you probably noticed from watching me over the years is I've got different coaches all the time. I'm always kind of moving on, because it's like, I learn everything I can from this person, and then I move to the next person, and then I move to the next person. And to me, success and creating a level of like growth in your life, like that is going to come on the other side of character traits and skill sets, right? So if a person has a character trait, I'm going to go learn that character trait. If a person has a skill set, I'm going to go learn that skill set. And I pretty much just move from thing to thing. Same thing with books. Like, I don't just read books because I like to read books. I read books because I have a deficiency in a thing, and I'm going to read a book in that thing. Right now, I'm like really trying to dive into branding, because I want this to be a freaking brand that sticks, right? I'm reading a book called Primal Branding right now. I don't even know the author. I found it on Amazon. I heard a guy on a podcast talk about it. But it's like, wherever my deficiency is, I'm going to go get a coach. That coach has to have followable excellence in that thing. And then I'm going to stay with them until I feel like I learn everything I can from that person, or until I get a feeling that maybe they are who they say they are, and I kind of move on.
One person you should, if you're looking at branding, you should look at Chris Do. He's the future on YouTube.
Okay.
He also runs a marketing branding company, and he talks a lot about how to build your personal brand and how to charge clients and everything like that. And one thing he always gets in trouble about is that you shouldn't negotiate price with people. If they're negotiating price, they're not the customer you're looking for.
Nope.
You let them know that what it is this price. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I'm sure that's something that you've probably dealt with, that internal monologue of, am I charging too much? Like, what am I offering for
Mhm.
X amount of dollars a month? How do you not justify, because you don't need to justify because it's your business, but how do you go back and forth with that internal monologue of not feeling like you're overcharging someone or undercharging someone?
Mhm. Self-worth. Like, you really got to feel a certain way about yourself, I think. And then, like, so every year, like, we're getting ready to set goals as a team this year. Every year, I set goals for my personal life, right? I call it my map. If you, matter of fact, this Saturday with our Mighty Men's group, I don't know if you're planning to come to that or not, but like we're gonna talk about like goals and setting goals for yourself, because I think sometimes there's a lot of conversation about goals, but it's usually like a person says they're gonna do a thing, and it's just kind of open ended. And there's this thing for a while where you set smart goals and stuff like that, which is good if you follow it, but most people don't. So for me, it's like, okay, I want to forecast out a year from now, and I look at my life in 4 categories: faith, family, fitness, and finance. And I say, hey, I'm going to forecast out 20 or 12 months from now, and I'm going to think big picture. And I'm going to tell lies about myself in each one of those categories, right? Then I'm going to reverse plan in 90-day increments, and I'm going to create, again, actionable things that I can kind of do from there. And then I'm going to make those lies into truth, right? So I think when it comes to, so to get back to your question of like, how do I charge and battle that internal dialogue, is now something I've always struggled with, again, being authentic. I created an identity for myself this year. A lot of times people will say like, well, Travis, who are you? When you get interviewed on a podcast, who are you? Well, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt, and I'm a podcaster, whatever. That's your worldly identity, right? Versus I come through the lens of like a godly identity. So I'm a man of honor, certainty, and discipline, and then I'm a warrior for God. Like that's my identity statement when somebody asks me who I am, which it sometimes for people is like too much, but it is what it is. But that's what I believe about myself. But I spoke those over myself because they were lies initially, because I was not super disciplined when I started saying that. I definitely wasn't certain, and I struggled with like gossiping and stuff like that, and I didn't honor people as well, and as well as I should have. And again, that all ties back to what I said earlier in the podcast about like being a representative and an ambassador for Jesus, right? So for me, when it comes to the price conversation, and this is something that my team has had to get off of me, right? They had to like, because initially when I started upping prices, they're like, dude, why are you charging so much? We had a jiu-jitsu client here who was like, man, I brought a friend to you and you told him what you charge now versus what you used to charge. Like, that's crazy. I'm like, no, it's not. Because I believe that's what we're worth, right? You'll pay $6 for a coffee, but you want to pay XYZ for a price at jiu-jitsu where I'm spending an hour with you instead of with my family. Do you see this, Jim? It's huge, right?
Yeah.
So
this ain't cheap.
You know what I'm saying? So to your question, I think you have to really believe that you are worth the thing you are. And if you're not yet, if that is a lie, right? Again, I mentioned I tell lies about myself and then I make them truth across 12 months. If you set a price point for yourself and then you say you're worth that and you're not, then that's a you problem, right?
Yeah.
That's a, like, you need to become the person that does that. So when somebody comes in here like, man, you guys charge a lot for jiu-jitsu, I'm like, yeah, we're really good.
Yeah.
And like, I mean that. And now we get people that travel through. I mean, I've got guys that hit up other gyms and they're like, man, like they're not doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
At least not in the local area, right? And people charge more than what I do for less. So you know what I mean? So I'm going to charge a fair price for a level of value that I believe in my heart we are worth, and the people that believe we're worth will stay, and the people that don't. And so the internal dialogue doesn't happen anymore. It used to happen a lot. I'm like, man, is this really worth it? And I'll say, no, we're worth that. It's okay if you don't want to pay that. That's fine. You won't find anything better. And I mean that. So that's kind of where I'm at now to answer that question.
How do you promote an environment to where, whether it's your coaches, the students, the athletes, anyone that's underneath these 4 walls or 8 walls and 2 roofs, how do you ensure that you're promoting an environment to where when people do hear the price, when they do, search around and whatnot, that they know the value is there? Because it's easy to say, well, that's how much we're worth. But if someone walks in and they see a shit show and they're like, you're out of your mind if you think that's worth. Like, how do you promote the environment to ensure that follows through? That lie that might have been told a while ago is now a truth.
And again, like, we try to be as perfect as we can. And we're not perfect all the time at this, but I think it starts with, like, again, back to leadership of like, here's the expectation. I mean, even when you were coaching, like, I wanted to look at your curriculum, we would share and I'd give you feedback. It was really good. So usually it wasn't like I had to change anything, but like, I think sometimes it's like, and this is, I was weak as a leader in this situation before, to where like, I would struggle with like calling people out on certain things. You probably remember when you were on the team before, I would struggle to say something to people. Now,
it would always bring it up to you, like your friends who were like, Cody, You
Yeah,
freaking
yeah.
got to say
I
something,
know,
bro.
I
You got to
know.
speak up.
So I'm so much better about it. I'm not perfect, but I'm much better at it about it now because of that reason. Because like we're not charging $9.99 per month to work out here. Like I recently heard that there's a gym local to here that like it doesn't even know who pays and who doesn't pay in their gym. You know, and it's a pretty successful gym, and people often compare me to them and like, well, they only charge $100. Well, go to there. They're not gonna know if
Yeah.
you're there or not. You know,
Yeah.
like you know what I mean. So I think for us, like to make sure that leadership doing the things that I'm asking my team to do, being prepared, showing up not like a bag of crap, like, you know, coming with a presence of mind, talking to people, getting to know them. Like I think that comes from setting personal values for yourself and leading yourself in a certain way, but also injecting your personal values and who you are as a person into the business too. That's probably why this gym suffered so much on this side for so long before, is because like I didn't give it the time that it needed. Versus like now, like I eat, sleep, and breathe both sides. It's not like one side gets more than the other. They both get me. Probably more than most people probably want, more than my family definitely want sometimes. But like, I think that standard starts with the person setting. Like this is who we are. This is what we do here. This is the level of presentation we're trying to do. When I was learning about like the Gracie stuff and how I wanted to kind of change the curriculum, I said like, hey, this is what we're gonna do. And I came to you guys and like that's what we changed. And then like back to the influence, the marketing, the sales. Then you gotta sell to people who are gonna do that. You gotta sell it on them. So I had to sit down with the jiu-jitsu team 2-3 months ago and I said, this is what we're going. Here's why. I got them really excited about it. And I was like this like hype man and I'm cheering and I'm all excited about it. And like now we're walking in step together. We're talking about things together. You know, like we're on the same page. We're all, the team is excited about where we're going and they give me ideas. And then like they also know that like I don't shut down their ideas. So when I give them feedback, because I allow their feedback to come, they're more willing to hear my feedback now. If that answers your
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So for people that are like newer to jujitsu and, you know, say they just got promoted to blue or they're been blue belt or they're a white belt and they're like, I love jujitsu, got nipped by the bug, I want to do this forever. Uh, and they eventually want to transition into coaching. What do you think they could do the best in order to promote that within themselves or enable to show their academy, their black belt, their instructor, whoever it is, that this person would be a good coach?
Yeah. So you're asking, the question you're asking, what I'm hearing you say is for the white belt, the blue belt, who is not currently a coach that wants to become one, how do they make themselves appealing to the
Yeah.
leadership?
And if you guys are hearing stuff in the background, it's because the CrossFit's going on the
Yeah,
other side.
this is live. They're coming at you. Well, it's not live when they're listening to it, but
It could be.
yeah, we should do that next time. Yeah, so I think like if I was looking for a coach, number one, I always look at like likability. Like, you know, like if people hated you and like, oh, Travis is a real jerk, I would have never asked you to coach, right? But you're a likable dude. People enjoy you. You make people laugh. You make people feel comfortable. You're always super helpful when like new faces are on the mat. You're like, hey, I'll be partners with that person. Like when I look for coaches, again, I don't ever want to say like what a person should do. I want to say what I've done. As a owner, as a leader of the jiu-jitsu side, I look for that. Are they likable? Right? Like, I don't want any butt heads on my team, right? So are they good to their wife? Do they love their kids? If they've got like an estranged wife and like their kids hate them and like they're always here and they got a family, I'm like, I don't know, like
Coming in smelling like alcohol,
you're
cigarettes.
probably not going to be a good fit, you know. And you know what's beautiful about our environment? There are people here that were smoking and drinking and stuff like that before, and they don't anymore.
Yeah.
Like that's like it's pushed out of you because you're like, wow, they don't do that. I'm gonna look stupid if I do that, you know. So, what I look for as an owner and as a leader, and I'm assuming that any other self-respecting gym owner that has a good cultured environment, they're probably looking most importantly, sure, know jujitsu, right? Or at least care about knowing more jujitsu, but more importantly, like, are you a good, likable person? So if like you want to be a coach and you suck as a person, you're always talking smack, like everybody hates you, like you're always hurting people, like you're never going to coach, at least not at my gym. Versus if like you're super likable, people enjoy your company, you know how to make people laugh, like you can feel the leadership energy on people sometimes. Like if you show and you put off that sort of energy into an environment, I think it'll kind of you'll naturally ascend into a coaching position, just because that's where I've seen everybody go in my environment, anyways.
Yeah, because I definitely feel. I think another funny thing is, you know, you and I grew as coaches quite a bit in the CrossFit side.
Went to
Like
our level 2 together,
did our
baby.
level
Yeah,
2
man.
together, you know, and it was an eye opener going to that level 2 because we
dude.
were like, you own gyms,
Mhm.
like like you guys can't explain a push press, and I think a lot of people, and especially in jiu-jitsu, they say, oh, I love jiu-jitsu, I'm pretty good at jiu-jitsu, I love CrossFit, I'm good at CrossFit, and then they're like, I want to become a coach, and then they start doing it, and they're like, this is freaking
It's
hard.
really hard.
It's really hard. Time management, knowing names, explaining techniques, you know what I mean? Understanding how to break it down in a level to where people can digest it. And I think that's a big issue that we have in jiu-jitsu is a lot of times there'll be a 15-step technique and the people are lost in the weeds, bro. They're like, where? You 3, 2, 1 clap. And we're like,
it's like when we make content, right? Like, how hard is it to not make content for your colleagues?
yeah,
Versus like your average listener that probably listens to your show. Even like as a guy who makes content, sometimes it's like I want to make stuff that's like higher level because I want my coach friends to read it and be like, that was good, dude. That
yeah,
was good. Nice job, bro. Pat on the back. Versus like, no, Mrs. Jones, who's 45, who's overweight, like she probably needs to see that. And more recently for me, like my avatar tends to be like men, right? So like I need to make it to them instead of my colleagues. But I think it's the same thing with like when you're like coaching and stuff like that. It's like you got to meet people who have no idea what you're talking about, where they are. Maybe they don't want to know the 27-step John Danaher approach to an armbar. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Which guilty as charged, guys. Like I've done it,
yeah,
literally me. So it is what it is. But yeah, I think just like understanding, like, hey man, like, what good is all of your knowledge if nobody freaking gets it?
yeah.
Yeah.
And if you kind of got to like learn how to read a room too. I know there's been times when I was coaching CrossFit and you would look around and people are glass-eyed and they're exhausted from the warm-ups and
man.
whatnot, and you're like, okay, I should probably keep moving on.
Down.
Yeah, and that was one thing too that you implemented a couple years ago. It's like you would start shadowing, people start shadowing, or which I think was great, and I think for jiu-jitsu that might be good too for new coaches is to have a more experienced coach.
Yeah.
Like, hey, like one thing and Keegan talks about, and I keep forgetting to tell him, like, hey, maybe you should say this, but he will say, turn your ulna up for like the ankle lock. And I'm like, just say go like hitchhike, like point your thumb up or whatever. Like it might be an easier
Blade of your arm.
Yeah, blade of your arm, like turn it up, because we used to say it back in the day, like keep your core engaged, and you're like, what does that even mean? How is the mother of four coming off the street that has no fitness ever and wants to get healthier is going to understand keeping your core engaged?
Hey, cough. You feel that?
Yeah.
Keep it like that.
Yeah.
You know
Flex your stomach like you're trying to show abs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? One cue I used to say, instead of like kicking your hips back or shooting your butt back or whatever, I used to say stick your butt out like you're taking a booty picture on Instagram. And people would laugh and they're like, that's good. Or stick your butt out like you're trying to close the fridge. Yeah.
They're thinking of every influencer that is
Yeah, right. You know what I mean? And so how as a coach do you navigate cues and feedback into where you're not doing, John Danaher is successcal because he's John Danaher, but no offense, Cody, you're not John Danaher.
I don't
You're
have
Cody
enough
Smith.
autism, dude.
So how do you know what is a good cue and a bad cue when you're coaching?
I don't know if there's bad cues. I think there's good cue. There's better cues and there's not so good cues. Like, okay, so there is bad cues, but ultimately, like, I have not seen things that were like completely out to lunch. It's generally like, well, we could have said that a little bit better, right? So ultimately, I think there's macro, micro in coaching, right? So when you're showing technique, it's probably good to maybe be somewhere in between based off of who's in the room, right? More advanced people, it's probably okay to go more into the weeds with things, right? For us, we have such a diverse environment that like I try to kind of split the middle, right? I try to go somewhere in the middle of like the micro, macro stuff. But as far as like when I'm in a macro environment, I will kind of go as deep as I need to reach as many people as possible in that environment. And then as I go, meaning macro, bunch of people, micro, 1 to 2 people in a small group, right? When I'm macro, I'll maybe go less deep. And then as I'm going around to other people and I'm making my rounds in between like technique and bringing people back together and stuff like that, that's when maybe based off of whoever I'm going with, whoever I'm talking to, whoever I'm coaching, I'll go in as deep as that person probably needs and give them, I want to do as much as possible with the least amount possible. So do more with less is what I always kind of think. Yeah, dude. So I want to go and I want to get this person, give this person enough energy or enough explanation, enough cueing to get them where they need to be and then stop there. Maybe the more advanced person, I'm going to cue them a little bit more and go a little bit deeper with them.
Yeah, that's great. So, but hey, we've been going for quite some time. The other side's about to start actually working out, and I don't want to get copyrighted from the music that's going to be playing.
We don't want that. Yeah.
So, if you give one piece of advice to a brand new white belt day one, what would it be?
That's a hard question, Travis. Best advice for a white belt is take your time. You're not going to know anything. Jiu-Jitsu is the only art you can't grow very fast in. Now you can create a level. You can get to a certain level. How do I explain that? I'm trying to paint this picture in my head. You're likely not going to become a world champion in a year, right? So be okay with that, and be okay with making mistakes. Don't try to settle in on a style. Don't try to settle in on like trying to go and win every competition. Like, look at it as this is come into it with a long-term mindset of like, this is going to take longer than I expected, and it's going to be harder than I expected.
Perfect. Yeah. And if people want to follow you, where can they find you at?
So you can check me out on Instagram. I'm at Coach Cody Smith on Instagram. You can also check out our gyms. We have 2 fitness gyms. It is at Virtuous Fitness WA and at Virtuous Fitness ID, because we just opened our gym in Idaho. And then we have our grappling gym here at Virtuous Grappling.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Cody, for coming on again, man. This is a great conversation. No technical issues besides the camera almost dying. It's going to be a good day. You know what I'm saying? I was listening to Creed on the way. Can you take me?
Classic.
So thank you guys so much for listening and watching at home. Remember, go check out Cody. Give him a follow, like, subscribe, whatever. 5 stars, all that stuff. Yeah. And remember, no L checks here. Peace.